the podcast I just released with Patrick Otellini, who is the National Affordable Housing Director at Swinerton, and also former Chief Resilient Officer for the city of San Francisco. Now, the interesting part about this is if you understand construction or development at all, or actually, even if you didn't, I want to share with you my biggest takeaways learning from someone that are talking to projects, developers, building affordable housing projects throughout the entire country. And let's talk about a few items that I wish I knew from the day I started. And one of the biggest items is the difference between why does someone choose a certain way to build something, right? It could be traditional stick build, it could be stick build over podium, blah, blah, blah. It could be concrete, it could be modular, it could be mass timber. All these different ways of building these projects are possible. But how do you actually choose? And during this podcast is where I was able to kind of review some of the best pros and cons of each type. Now, mass timber makes a lot of sense for Swinerton because they have a great partnership now. But what they're trying to do is also figure out, like, hey, how do we start being more creative with how we contribute to certain capital stacks? One of the ways that they do is they try to help out the affordable housing developer a ton in the pre-construction, right? Pre-development costs. And these are generally what we call soft costs. Soft costs are fees that you might pay for title, permits, engineering, architecture fees, all these different types of fees that are not necessarily tied to the material or the hard construction, right? That's why you have soft costs and hard costs. Hard costs are your labor and your materials to actually build the building. Soft costs are sort of those administrative costs, which may include city fees, permit fees, impact fees, but also all the different fees that you have to pay to all your consultants and your specialty knowledge folks, such as architects and civil engineer, structural engineer, blah, 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 blah. And with them thinking that they can contribute those costs towards capital stack, that gives the developer more flexibility. One, it can allow them to have lower upfront costs, or two, have them essentially where the GC is contributing their fees as a capital contribution to the capital stack. So on day one, you kind of realize that, or you can tell a lender that they already had a ton of money that's been set into the project. That's why it's so beneficial. Concrete has been sort of tried and true for a much longer time, although it's not the most green and sustainable way of building. It's also very well understood. And in areas where Florida, where it's high risk, high wind risk, high flood risk from hurricanes, storms every single year, concrete sometimes helps lower your overall cost of your insurance expenses, right? During the podcast, Patrick brought up an example of when they discussed all the pros and cons of each one, right? He talked about how one project with concrete was going to save them about $500,000 a year in insurance premium savings throughout the entire course of the project. That is huge, huge amount of savings for an entire project. So those are the considerations that you got to put into your head to figure out whether or not something is the right choice for you. Now, then we talked about modular. Modular sometimes is kind of placed out in the world as, oh, this is the way to build, it's the fastest way, blah, blah, blah. But I've talked to plenty of people, and they have been of the opinion that, hey, yeah, a modular sounds great in concept, but the problem is a lot of people, they don't do a good job of, frankly, vetting their modular suppliers, because you got to view that as a supplier, right? Do they have a balance sheet? Do they have the cash to front the production of those modular units? Most of the time, modular buildings, they require you, or modular suppliers require you to put a big down payment. And that's because they need that down payment to fund the raw goods, right? The cost of goods, the lumber, all the materials to actually make the final finished modular product. That's so important. Okay. So those are the factors that matter a ton. I just want to kind of call them out because I've seen a lot of people tell me where modular just did not work out. They just did not execute on what they said they were going to do. So all these big problems are huge, huge problems. All right. So those are some of my biggest takeaways here, but there are some really, really good stories that Patrick was able to share. I just want to kind of front load this video and highlight for you what it means for you as a developer, especially if you're considering the pros and cons of each way to build and the financial considerations of every single approach on how to build an apartment building, right? Go figure. But man, Patrick has some great stories about how he had to help the city of San Francisco retrofit, will do a partial retrofit of all the buildings to get it to the seismic safety standards. That's a gnarly problem. But he was able to break it down and show me exactly what and how they got it done. And guess what? It involved a lot of collaboration, which is something that you don't necessarily see. So this was such an amazing episode. There's so many gems. If you're serious about getting into the development game, you have to listen to this. You have to learn at a high level what the different types of construction methodologies there are and how to apply it towards your own project. So you know, hey, if I'm looking at modular, if I'm looking at mass timber, if I'm looking at concrete, if I'm looking at a traditional stick built, what are the big considerations that I need to understand so that I figure out how to ask my GC the right questions to see whether or not the GC is knowledgeable and a good partner, and then decide based on all the knowledge that I've seen, right? Based on my confidence in the ability for the project to get built and for the plan that I set aside in my underwriting for it to be executed. That's why it's so important. That's why I want to share this podcast with you and highlight on my live today so you can see why you got to listen to this podcast episode because this is so good. You have to listen to it, especially if you just want to get a little smarter about building, especially in a big game of affordable housing development. You have to know this. All right. Hope you all have an amazing Wednesday. I'll see you all tomorrow for day 776.